Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. My name is Ashton. I'll be joined by Ben, Muhammad, Maddie, and Tony. The five of us will be explaining to you, to the best of our abilities, the topic of the 5 phases of joining a group. This will include personal examples throughout, some more niche situations that will best help illustrate a specific point. I will be breaking down the first of the 5, called the antecedent phase. This includes the preconceived notions towards a group. Ben will then take over and cover all things anticipatory, which encapsulates making judgments based on expectations. Muhammad will follow with the encounter phase, where you'll see people having their first chance of interacting with the group. We will then hand things over to Maddie, talking more in depth about the assimilation phase, or when one chooses to accept becoming part of a group. Lastly, we will hand things over to Tony, and she will wrap things up, speaking on the exit phase, which is comprised of voluntarily or involuntarily departing from a group. We hope to leave you with a lasting understanding of all that happens when someone joins a group. I will now start things off with the antecedent phase. This is defined as the phase of group socialization in which people develop certain beliefs, attitudes, and expectations about a group. An example I'm sure most of you have experienced in the past is having classes with small group work and you ended up carrying most of the weight in the group. So it's understandable to feel the work will never be split evenly. What this creates is a barrier towards the future small groups you will join because of the previous exchanges being so negative. Now I'm going to hand things over to Ben to help you better understand his phase.
Hi there, my name is Ben Cusick, and I will be explaining the anticipatory phase with you guys. So the anticipatory phase is when we make judgments about our groups. The first step is when we make judgments or what we predict on doing with our small group. So like in a good example of this would probably be like our small group. I made a judgment coming in that I would first meet you all you guys, and then also discuss like what we'd be presenting here today, and then any other topics that we were talking about. The second step of this would be judgments based on any past experiences that you might have had with small groups. So for instance, joining a study group. So there's going to be many different experiences that many people have. For example, I had one where I joined a study group and the first day I didn't even bring anything. So I was kind of outcast upon because I didn't bring anything, and I assumed they were all pretty, not so happy with me, and didn't, because I didn't bring any of my materials. And finally, the last stage in anticipatory phase is when you're going to judge the other group based on any particular traditions and that you've heard of from that group. So again, going off the small group with the study group, any necessary materials that you need to bring, you should bring. And then sometimes a group have like parties, or they'd assign some members to bring food to that group, and you are expected to fulfill these expectations. And now with the encounter phase, the first time you actually interact with the group, either physically, electronically, with electronically, you do like virtual reality or like a teleconferencing meeting. There's 3 important main tasks that happen with the encountering phase. The first task is the group often uses their initial meeting to establish missions and define their goals. So I'm going back with the study group again. Some will typically establish like any rules that they have or any expectations they want to set. The main goal will be more familiar with what you're studying to get the best grades possible as well. The second step of the encounter phase is probably often assigning roles and responsibilities during the encounter phase. So for instance, when I first joined our small group, I kind of noticed that Tony and Ashton kind of led it. And then me and Maddie were more like skeptical, and we kind of just laid back and let them lead. I would say that was off my first impression of this. And finally, in the encounter phase, as a reminder of any members or expectations for their behavior, expectations will form part of the group's culture. Most of these statements will wind down eventually, with everyone from this group is expected to do his or her fair share of work. And for example, like the co-leader of a small group, like going back to the study group, is typically more involved in the group, addressing the entire group at the end of the meeting to clarify everyone what is required of them or what they wish to proceed involving with this group. So mostly they will set ground rules and expectations. They also might add that no one person is more important than the other. Now I'll lead it to Maddie.
Hi, I'm Maddie Marquardt, and I will be talking about the assimilation phase. So the assimilation phase is where members decide to accept a group's culture, and the group will acquire its own identity. So rather than thinking of yourselves as us and them or you and I, you will think of yourselves as we. And the assimilation phase comes after the first meeting in the encounter phase, where the groups and the culture of the group are set. And in the assimilation phase, you decide to stay in the group and you become a part of that culture. In the assimilation phase, people typically set certain rituals or communication behaviors that signify their membership. So, for example, a youth group may create sweatshirts or another clothing that may signify their membership, and it could have a symbol or the name of the group. Um, and then the process of assimilation is also continual and will change over time. So as the group keeps accomplishing goals and members make personal relationships, the communication of the group will be enhanced, allowing it to continue to develop and change over time. So members adopt the group's culture when they join, but as they add their own ideas and input, they can also change the group. And then interdependence is also really important in a small group. So interdependence is when what one person does can affect everyone else. So for example, in a group that provides support, if a really big life event happens, everyone could celebrate that success. So the group will continue to communicate and develop in these ways, and it will allow the group to change over time. And there can also be different levels of assimilation. So if you have more differences and similarities with the group, that could cause more trouble with the assimilation. So if you move to a new country and you don't know the language, you may have a lot of trouble assimilating to the group because there's a language barrier and a cultural barrier. You could also have trouble because groups are established for different functions. So a group with the function of brainstorming for a big event, they could have more trouble assimilating because you have to assimilate more to do better in that group. And there are also really important parts to remaining in a group. So for new members, you have to be sure to embrace the culture and not clash against it. And you should be prepared to take on roles and learn what goals matter most to the group and prioritize those. And the communication aspect of small groups is also really important in keeping a group together. So you should be prepared to sacrifice mainly your time and avoid social loafing. And you should also be prepared to encounter conflict and trouble coordinating events and have methods in place to overcome or prevent those. And then assimilation is when you become truly immersed in a group and you become a we rather than a you or an I.
Okay, thank you, Maddie. The fifth and final stage of small group socialization is exit, where an individual may leave the group either voluntarily or involuntarily. In the case of voluntary, an individual may leave the group due to expectations not being met. The common objectives within the group being accomplished leaves nothing left for the members to do. You may think of the Beatles breaking up, where members leave a group due to irreconcilable creative differences. Or another example, you may join a board of directors and the group may move in a direction that you don't agree with. At that point, you may decide to leave the board voluntarily. Secondly, we have involuntary exit. A person may be forced out of a group due to issues of expectations not being met by fellow group members or the individual within that group. You can think of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, for example, as they've recently forced out their guitarist, Josh Klinghoffer, for John Frusciante, because the expectations weren't being met and the group collectively decided to switch out members for the betterment of the group. Also, the case of a small committee who's been put together to put on a function, and somehow the funding for that particular function dries up and they're unable to accomplish that objective due to lack of funding. Every group has an expiration date, and whether an individual in a group leaves voluntarily or involuntarily, what they've experienced is a common process of small group socialization. As this group presentation comes to a close, I want to touch base on all the points that have been described and broken down by our fellow group members. These 5 phases of group socialization illustrate the process of the typical processes in small group interaction. First, we have antecedent, where an individual starts to develop their preconceived ideas about what a certain group does. And then anticipatory, a phase where we start to form judgments on the purposes and roles within that group. Third, we have encounter, where we experience the group in various contexts, both virtually or physically, where roles and responsibilities are then assigned to each individual member. Fourth, we have assimilation, where group members start to accept and adapt within the group's culture. And fifth, we have exit, where we leave the group voluntarily or involuntarily. We were able to define these 5 phases and give various examples from small group contexts. Researchers have been able to distill this concept of small group interaction into the phases we've discussed, as we've illuminated a process that's so deeply ingrained in our nature as human beings, our need to connect and adapt and evolve together and communicate. We're socialized into small groups in order to reach common goals, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.